A very warm welcome to the fourth episode in the series of conversation that we are having with Professor Dr. C. Raj Kumar, Founding Vice-Chancellor, O.P. Jindal Global University. In our previous conversation, Professor Raj and I spoke about his experiences at Loyola College at Chennai, his life and journey in Chennai. But in today's episode, we are moving from south to north. And you're looking into Professor Raj's transition from a commerce student at Loyola College to a law student in Delhi University and what it meant in terms of his both personal and professional journey. Raj, of course, we're interested to know about your journey with law. But before we come to the law bit, we want to know about the Delhi University bit. And especially students, young students in India have stars in their eyes when they think about Delhi University. It is an aspirational thing to be able to come to Delhi University. What was it like for you? Why Delhi University?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean, you said it right. There's Delhi University is an aspiration for, millions of students across the country. And after my undergraduation in Loyola College, I was keen to study law. And that was that's part of my aspiration. But I also wanted to get out of Chennai. And part of my thinking, at least at that time, was Delhi University could also be a fertile ground for me to pursue a bit of civil services aspiration. Now, it's another matter that never happened as much as was part of my initial aspiration. But Delhi University clearly was the place where I wanted to go to pursue law, but also to discover India. Yeah. And I realized that after being in Delhi University, because DU, even today, and definitely at that time, is the microcosm of India. Hitherto, having studied in Loyola, I met people from across the state of Tamil Nadu, barely anybody from any other part of India. But Delhi University was truly remarkable. It was just a melting pot. Diversity was writ large in Delhi University. I had met students from across all states of India, but also parts of India that I barely knew that it existed, and clearly from northeastern part of India. Yeah. And that gave opportunities for me to know India more, but in that process, discover what an extraordinary diverse country India is. And that was Delhi University for me.
Well, were you able to translate this thought that you had in your mind as to why Delhi University? How did you translate that thought to your family, to your parents? Were they okay with your decision to, come all the way to Delhi University to pursue law?
Yeah, well, my father, of course, was very supportive, and many years ago, he had worked in Delhi and there was that familiarity. But definitely my mother was a bit uncomfortable because it's quite far. In fact, today all of us take flights, but for me to come from Chennai to Delhi, it was 2 nights of train journey. So essentially but then that also became a discovery of India for me. I mean, imagine you start your train journey from Tamil Nadu and you pass through Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, UP, and then ultimately you're coming into Delhi. You realize how large India is and how diverse it is. You are transcending different languages, different culture, different cuisine, different climatic conditions, different clothes. The entire diversity of India is in front of you and you are discovering that as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed every bit of it. But I will tell you there are lots of challenges that come for a person like me, comes from South India, coming into Delhi.
Yeah, we will want to talk about the challenges. And, what you said about the train journey, it's very interesting because, most of us take flights now for convenience and other issues. It's so impersonal. A journey by plane is so impersonal. And train journey is about a very community experience. You experience so much through that journey. And
I love train journeys.
It's amazing.
And if there's one thing that I miss in my professional life today, is train journeys. Not only because of the fun of traveling, but I am amazed in train journeys when strangers in India are ready to reveal so much about themselves and are prepared to ask so much about the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember many years, much after I had studied, but I did take a train journey, and India hasn't changed. So you will have absolute strangers asking very personal questions about yourself,
Giving you food,
and also telling so much about them, including their bank account details and asking about what your salary is and when you're getting married and who you should get married. It's just extraordinary. Of course, I can imagine for a typical Westerner or even people from this generation, those questions will be very personal and even offensive. But for me, I cherish those moments of how strangers can interact with. In a way, I've always felt that Indian Railways is one of the most powerful democratic institution, because it not only connected the whole of India, but it transcended the socio-economic diversity and differences that India holds. Ordinary people were able to travel across India. It's another matter now low-cost airlines have substituted that role, and people are traveling even with a lesser cost. But at least for the first 70 years of Indian independence, railways was a very important way by which people were able to travel, but in that process, it was able to connect the poorest parts of India to other parts of India.
Completely. And I think if one wants to truly experience incredible India, they must take a train journey.
Absolutely.
That truly captures what India
Absolutely.
represents. Going back to the earlier question as to, Delhi University, decision to come, parents, a little bit of apprehension, but also wanting to support your own dreams. Was there any moment of doubt in your own, because it was a big decision from a BCom undergrad degree to move completely to law and to move to an alien city, which is completely different in terms of language and culture and everything else from where you have been born and brought up in. So was there in your mind at any point of time a moment of doubt or apprehension regarding that?
So one thing was an immediate surprise for me. I came from Chennai, and while Tamil is the dominant language, but within Loyola as an institution and even city of Chennai, there is enough, presence of English in terms of symbols and, engagement and interaction. You can get away a lot without even Tamil. But it was quite surprising for me when I came to Delhi that Hindi was so dominantly prevailing. And I did not know the language. And that was one of the, moments when I felt very much alien into a place I have come, where my people whom I was meeting. Now, interestingly, there were people from other parts of India where Hindi is not the dominant language, but most of them knew Hindi. Almost all of North India, even parts of South India, and almost all parts of Northeast India and West, people would speak Hindi, and they knew Hindi, at least the people whom I knew. I was so uniquely placed, being from Tamil Nadu, for various historical reasons, something that I never had the opportunity to learn. And there are lots of interesting situations that I had to deal with. One of my, moments of, dealing with the language was the first few days. I don't remember. Maybe it was a second or third day of my stay. I was staying in one of the hostels in Delhi, in the Guire Hall. And I was not feeling well. And of course, I did not know anybody. So you have to deal with yourself things. So since I was unwell, I found out from people talking to people where I can get medicines. And somebody told me that there is a medical shop in a place called Kingsway Camp, which is a 15-minute walk from my hostel. So I kind of walked through, navigated the Delhi University campus area, and finally reached this shop. This was 1994, maybe the third day of my stay in Delhi. And there were a lot of people in this medical shop and trying to get the attention of this person. And I need to convey to him that I need a medicine. I was looking for a crocin, but I wanted to first tell him that I'm not well and I need a crocin. And now I quickly realized that he's not going to understand English. And so I am looking at the situation, and I am seeing these 20, 30 people trying to get his attention, and I am standing even behind. And I am speaking loud and said, "मैं बेकार हूँ." And essentially, I did not know, because I kind of picked up these words, and people started laughing, and suddenly everybody looked at me, and attention was, and I got the attention. But then he only looked at me, and then they began doing what they were doing. Then I insisted further, said, "Main bekar hoon." And of course, one student at that time saw me doing this, and took me aside and said, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I'm not feeling well, and I need medicine. I need crocin." So he asked for crocin, and now what he didn't do was, he didn't tell me what was wrong in what I was saying, and he gave me the medicine, and I returned back to my hostel. Then my friends came, and or rather the roommate who I'd met, I told him that, "Listen, I said bekar because I am not feeling well." And then he started laughing, and then he told me the difference between bukar and bekar. And that was the first baptism to Hindi language, and what bekar can be so different from bukar. But you know what? This is a serious issue.
It is.
For those who don't know another language, you not only find it alien, but the sense of, let's say, you're lost in a city is so all pervasive. And this was just a beginning. I was finding it very difficult to communicate with people in the dining hall, people who, if I were to take a rickshaw or somewhere, everything was so difficult. And to make matters worse, the friends who I made in law faculty would end up talking to me in English.
Yeah.
So I am not only not knowing the language, but I have no opportunity to learn it. Because people feel, since I don't understand, might as well. They will communicate with each other in Hindi, but to me in English. And then I took upon a challenge to learn Hindi, and that's another journey altogether.
No, I resonate with it so much and I think many others would, because I studied in Delhi University too, and I came from Northeast, and I thought I spoke very good Hindi. But it's only when I came here, I realized that the accent was all wrong. So even when I thought I was speaking good Hindi,
right,
nobody understood what I was saying, and what kind of a challenge that could be. But Raj, could you tell us then, because you spoke about hostel and your roommates coming in, so how was the hostel life like in the context
it's an extraordinary story of Delhi University, because there is a huge disproportionate number of people who want the hostel, and far fewer actually get it. So DU, at least then, had 5 postgraduate student hostels, and I ended up staying for short periods of time in 2 of them, the PG Men's Hostel and the Guire Hall. And those were all short periods of time staying with another person who's actually in the room, who's allotted the room. But with a lot of difficulty, almost after, I think, 6 months, I ended up getting a hostel, which I think is one of the most amazing hostels, not necessarily for its infrastructure, but its vision. It's called the International Students' House. It's located on the Mall Road, just opposite to Khalsa College. The reason it's special is that the International Students' House of Delhi University Hostel is the only hostel which had international students. But then the question is, why am I there? Well, they had a vision where they would have 60% of students from around the world and 40% of students from across India. So the idea was to have this interaction between international students and Indian students across different states. So we had 1 or 2 from Tamil Nadu, and from every part of India, from all the way from Jammu and Kashmir to Tamil Nadu, to Karnataka, to West Bengal, to Assam. And I really met some amazing people there, because not only the international students from different parts of the world, but also Indian students from other parts of India, not only from my discipline, but also from other discipline. It was a fantastic experience. I think when I look back at that experience, I'll say that hostel life of a student is so critical, because this was the first time I experienced full freedom, because there was nobody to regulate anything. What time I get up, what time I go back home, where I go, what to do. There is nobody to monitor my movement. And this is, of course, pre-mobile phone. So, but then, because you have freedom and complete autonomy over what you do, you end up developing a greater sense of responsibility. And with all freedom comes responsibility. You charter your own life because there's nobody to monitor you, and you need to do what's the right thing to do. That's where some of the foundational values that have grown up with will end up becoming your sort of lighthouse, and you move in that direction.
Absolutely. The groundings that you get is what anchors you, I think, through this process. But quick question, Raj. You spoke about the language and how that was a challenge. And one big part of hostel life, in college life in general, is also food. And, there is a big cultural difference in terms of how, the kind of cuisines available, particularly hostel food, what is being served, and, what you're used to in your own context, in your own region. So was that a challenge?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so interesting that you're used to a very different cuisine all through your life. Although I would say, because my parents had very early on, they had worked, and my father had worked in Delhi, we were familiar with rotis and, parathas and things like that. But the larger domination is clearly the South Indian food when you're there. And suddenly you're thrown into Delhi and you start experiencing hostel food. And I quickly discovered that I loved it. I loved the North Indian food. And I would relish and cherish the experience of North Indian food, not necessarily in the hostel. And I had several friends with whom I would go out. But listen, we are students, so we are living a hand-to-mouth living. I am already being paid for the student dining facility there. So at any opportunity to eat out, we will discover the dabas of Delhi. And I just loved it. My favorite remains Kareem's. One of my very dear friends at that time continues to be a good friend, Sudhir Mishra. He and I would go to Kareem's. We tried to do it at least once a week.
And you were a non-vegetarian at that
time. I
was
a non-vegetarian, a hardcore non-vegetarian, I would say. And we just enjoyed eating in so many small and medium type joints, dabas. And it was amazing. And I realized that I just loved every part of North Indian food and cuisine, that I realized that almost I missed it for, all through my 2 decades of living in Chennai. So, food was never a problem for me. And I think even today, my wife was a Punjabi Jain from Delhi. She actually is much more committed to South Indian food than me. I mean, I like all kinds of food, but definitely I love North Indian food as well.
Raj, I mean, hostel is also the time that many of us experimented with cooking, like not elaborate cooking, but, we would make Maggi, or, we would try, variations of Maggi. At hostel, we had, Delhi University hostels have hot plates where you can do a little bit of cooking. So did you try to experiment?
Oh, absolutely. No, not just experiment. I mean, I still believe that I make the best Maggi. I mean, I have done so much of Maggi cooking because there's a reason why that's the case also. And as you rightly said, typically the dining hall gets over around 8:39. And most of the time, and most of us don't end up sleeping till 3 a.m. So around midnight or post-midnight, and by the way, we didn't, in the international students' house, we didn't have any separate pantry. So we would have I would have a proper cooking equipment in the room. And I would do that Maggi. And of course, Maggi claims that it's a 2-minute noodles, but I have always contested that claim. It's fantastic. If you want to make good Maggi, it takes 20 minutes.
Oh, that is a lot.
It's a lot because there's a lot of process involved in it, and it's amazing. And we've done, egg Maggies and other variations, as you rightly said.
Cheese Maggi.
Absolutely. So, in fact, those are, again, fantastic memories because it doesn't stop there. We have conversations surrounding, government and society and law and justice. In fact, one of the things that I discovered is through Delhi University experience was I began to like law so much. Law for what it stands, but what possibilities it can create and how it can establish a political and social order that will strengthen democracy. These are also conversations that we would have late at night, besides, of course, movies itself. What I did tell you is that one of the ways by which I overcame the challenge of language was through movies. So hitherto I had not watched Hindi movies because obviously language was a barrier. But Delhi University, I made a mission for myself that I have to learn the language. My friends are not going to speak to me in English, in Hindi. So I will learn the language through watching movies. So I would incessantly watch films and all kinds of films. I remember one of that, I think in 1994, during 94, 97, I was in Delhi University. I watched so many movies at that time, and each one of them are very special. But Dil To Pagal Hai was there at that time. Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge. All these, some of the movies that inspired me personally a lot was I watched at that time, and I learned. I picked up the language, and I would use it, interestingly, with rickshaw pullers. So I would sit in a rickshaw and actually have random conversations with these people, and that's how I picked up my language. So my friends tell me that I have a bit of a Bihari/UP accent when I speak Hindi, but over the years it has mixed with other accents too. But my Hindi speaking abilities, I must say, is better than most of my South Indian friends who actually know how to read and write Hindi, which I have not cultivated, but I can actually speak and understand Hindi better than them.
So it basically tells us what movies and Maggie
represent
for entire generations of students in India. So with that, Raj, we spoke about Loyola College and your experience at Loyola College and what the classroom itself, represented for you, what it meant to be part of a class. And so what was that in DU, when you walked into a DU law faculty class for the first time and you met the faculty teaching there, the students, what was that experience like?
It was phenomenal. I mean, we were very fortunate that was the time when some of the giants, some of the most outstanding faculty members were teaching. Besides the leading giants in the field, including Professor M.P. Singh, Professor B.B. Pandey, and Professor Parmanand Singh, who were in the faculty, we had Professor M.C. Sharma, taught jurisprudence. We had people like T.D. Sethi and K.R. Sharma. We actually had Rajiv Khanna, some of the most outstanding teachers. They were not necessarily, all of them were serious researchers, but they were fantastic teachers. The classroom became an amazing experience of intellectual engagement. And most importantly, they made sure that the students develop a deep sense of intellectual curiosity towards law. In fact, there's one thing that all of us as teachers need to learn from that generation is that they made sure that they developed that interest and curiosity among the students. And that in turn led the students to develop an interest for law. And that's how my interest in law grew. I mean, frankly speaking, Professor M.P. Singh and Professor Pandey and Parmanand Singh, these three individuals singularly shaped my thinking about public law, comparative law, about human rights, criminal justice, and jurisprudence. These are foundational aspects of law that I continue to grapple with, and that laid the foundation for my own future journeys in law and other institutions, including at Oxford and Harvard and Hong Kong.
Yeah, and Raj, absolutely. And also, as you said, when you studied some of the stalwarts in legal scholarship in India was teaching at that time at Delhi University. And it also had a very strong and vibrant culture of co-curricular activities going beyond the classroom in terms of the teaching and learning process. So were you part of that sort of ecosystem as well?
Absolutely. Well, listen, Upasana, now we are in a different institutional ecosystem. Our students, I believe, get the best of the opportunities that any institution anywhere in the world could offer. I'm not talking about India. And I'm not even saying this because I happen to be the Vice-Chancellor. The reality is Jindal students are so privileged that they get the opportunities of the world that most institutions in the world cannot get. Having said that, when I was a student at Delhi University, we were constantly starved and are seeking out for opportunities. Opportunities don't come and knock at your door. You need to seek it out. I did a lot of things in Campus Law Center, Law Faculty, Delhi University, and they are very special for me because they laid the foundation for my future. But more importantly, it helped me understand and appreciate so many aspects of law and justice that I cherish even today. At that time, one of the most inspiring experiences that I had was a project that I had undertaken, which I will talk to you more about it. But besides that project, which I will tell you shortly, I also actively involved myself in Constitutional Law Society, Environmental Law Society, cleaning up the campus program, so many other activities. So academics alone was what my calling. I was doing other things as well.
But you said you were going to talk about a project
that
you were part
so
of.
The project that we undertook was something like this. There is a important issue that even today India faces, which is about the relationship between parks and people and wildlife. So we were working we formed a group, and let me step back a bit. There was a competition announced by the National Law School of India, University Bangalore, on promoting social values in law and advocacy. And the theme of that competition was protecting resources and the environment. How do we balance that? And so you're supposed to identify a local community, work with that community for 1 year, understand that community and how that community interacts with the environment, and what are the laws that are going to impact the environment and the community, and how you're going to respond to it. It's a very unique project. Professor Madhav Menon was the director of the National Law School, Bangalore at that time. He initiated this project. And I, from Delhi University, became very excited about it. Then we formed a group. Doing something in DU is not easy, as you can imagine. I brought together a bunch of people with all the constraints of language and other things. And we formed what is known as a student study group. And I went to the then professor in charge, Professor Govind Mishra, and persuaded him. He supported the idea, and we formed the group and put in an application. Now, that's only one part of the story. But to cut the story short, I spent almost a year working with the Van Gujjar community of the Rajaji National Park and trying to understand the symbiotic relationship that exists between the park and the people. The heart of the problem is as follows. This community has been living in the Rajaji National Park for many, many years. And the government of India had declared that area as a national park. When you declare an area as a national park, people can't be living in it. And the purpose of that declaration was to protect the elephants and other wildlife. Now, that declaration resulted in huge challenges of the local community because they've been living in the forest and dependent on the forest produce for a very long time. And so you have, on the one hand, the local community who had reasons to stay on the forest. You have the wildlife, including elephants, who need to be protected. The elephant corridor has to be cleared. You have vested interest, including poachers and others who may have reasons for the local community not to be there. Then you have the Wildlife Institute of India, but also government officials who have, for very good reasons, may not want the Gujar community in it. We were at the thick and thin of it, and we worked on this project and produced a report. And that report opened up so many things in my mind and our colleagues who worked on it as to the limitations of law and the power of law that can help transform society.
Oh, what an interesting story, because, praxis-based learning,
Yes.
This is what we keep talking about today.
Absolutely.
And I want to actually tie it up to something else that you were saying earlier about seeking opportunities, and how sometimes when opportunities are available to you on a platter, you may not understand the importance of it or value it as much as that decision that you have taken and the group of people that came together to seek this opportunity out, and how it contributed not only towards understanding that issue better, but also in your understandings of law policy itself. So thank you. very much for sharing
Thank
that
you.
story. And with that, actually, I connect it to another question that comes to my mind, because you're talking about how active you were in campus life, in, say, Constitutional Law Society, cleaning up the campus, and a project like the one you described. And in our last episode, if you remember, Raj, you spoke about that you stood for elections at Loyola College. And Delhi University, the election scene is completely different. I mean, it is massive. It is truly, a mini political field. So were you ever tempted to think about elections or politics, or how did you look at the Delhi University scenario?
Well, not at all, Upasana. In fact, I was rather a bit disappointed and frankly, rather sad to see how the student elections and student politics, at least at that time, was prevailing when it comes to how national level political parties were influencing and even impacting the young minds when it comes to their thought process. Now, I'm all for student politics and students engaging in politics, but my problem with that approach is their role and responsibility was confined to the jurisdiction of the university, but there the university could have been a far more apolitical space in which students can usefully contribute to the growth and development of the university. They don't have powers beyond the university to make any contribution. And there were so many challenges that were prevailing within the university in which student unions and councils can make a useful contribution. And that is why I have always maintained that national level political parties, I believe, should have a relatively lesser stay in what happens in university campuses. That's not healthy for university campuses. At the same time, university should promote democratic approaches and democratic practices within the student council and student union so that they can start experiencing democracy at that time itself.
No, absolutely. And how often, and particularly in the context like Delhi University and some of the other university campuses in India, the lines get blurred.
Yes.
And therefore, it's not about the institution or institutional development anymore.
Correct.
And perhaps, and you're very right, that university education and the kind of elections or student politics that happen should be about development of their democratic ethos.
Absolutely.
That will go a long way in terms of not only the development of the institution or the personalities of the people, but the country's democratic ethos as such. Can I do a little bit of a segue completely from all of these rather significant questions? But, you often, one of the themes that we have, we've been talking over couple of 3-4 episodes now, and your love for movies come through in each one of them, including the fact that it served a practical purpose of helping you learn a language that helped you navigate Delhi. Do you still indulge in watching movies? Do you largely watch Bollywood films? What is your relationship with movies?
I do watch them. In fact, it's one of my biggest a good distraction. I actually think. And I also watch, nowadays there are amazing web series as well, which I watch and I get a lot of inspiration from that as well. And I do think that it's an important way by which you can, get out of what your core activities and mindset is. You're so consumed by your work. Yeah. But also it's a very useful way of knowing things that you didn't care to know or didn't have opportunity to know as deeply. But you need to know about it. In fact, recently I had watched this amazing web series, which I encourage our students also to watch, which is Rocket Boys, the extraordinary story of two Indian scientists, both Vikram Sarabhai and Homi Bhabha, how they returned from Cambridge and were involved in the establishment of the future of Indian science, along with C.V. Raman and much later Dr. Abdul Kalam. So those are, when I get inspiration, but also it's a lot of fun as well. I mean, there's so much that movies can do to you, but I think the most important part of what a good movie can do is it can make you think as well. And that's something which I value a lot, in my movie watching experiences.
How do you make the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I try to do it late nights and some weekends. But time is one of those things where you have to prioritize. So, for example, I'm not a big party person. I don't socialize a lot beyond my work. So, I save a lot of that time. Whatever time I get, I end up watching films. But in my travels, I make it a point to watch films. That's how I kind of catch up on films that I might have missed when I'm working.
Okay, I'm curious to know. I know that, how busy you are, all of us do. I know that you don't socialize much and you've taken out time to watch movies and all of that. Do you also take out time to say, not an academic book necessarily, but do you pick up a book and read, or do you get the time to pick up a book and read?
Yes, that's something which I do a lot. Although I must say that my overall reading has significantly reduced since I became Vice-Chancellor. Nowadays, my faculty and students keep me busy reading emails. I would like to, do less of reading emails and more of reading books. But definitely I make it a point to read books that matter. And I think one of the things that books do is that it kind of opens up a new aspect of thinking that you never had. But then what ends up happening I'm not a big fiction reader. I do mostly non-fiction, but I gravitate nowadays to my core areas of interest, which is now education and governance and development and law and justice and things like that. So that's an area where I continue to gravitate, and I do a lot of reading. But I will say this, that there's one thing that has affected in this entire journey of being the founding Vice-Chancellor of this university is the time that I'm able to give for reading.
Raj, we've largely been talking about, at least in the last two conversations that I've had with you, about college life and what it represents and what are the challenges and what are the ways to navigate those challenges. And given that we are in an institution of higher education, these are very, very significant questions for most of those students who come and study with us or in any other institutions. These are truly significant questions. So if you have to give one piece of advice to all those who are watching this episode as to what is it that they must keep in mind while thinking about college and college life, what would that be?
So I think, be inquisitive and develop a deep sense of curiosity. And that's something which you should nurture from the very beginning, and it's never late. Make the best use of the opportunities. I mean, there's one thing that we were creating opportunities. I mean, one of the things I will say is in Delhi University, we were creating opportunities where we snatched those opportunities. But if you are a student at Jindal, you have so many opportunities, but you have to take it and use them. And that's up to you. And the third thing I would say is that start dreaming. I mean, don't make plans which are not necessarily big enough to be worthy of planning. But start dreaming. Don't hesitate to dream, because if you begin to dream, you will start working towards fulfilling those dreams. Don't limit your ability to dream, because if there is one thing that great institutions can provide, is the opportunity to dream and to work towards fulfilling those dreams. The fourth thing which I have always cherished is that never accept failure. Every failure that you end up having is one little step towards success. And I think this is something which we should tell our students a lot, and our young people, our children as well, is that I do see a greater degree of frustration and disappointment in failures in this generation when they end up having a lot more privileges. And I think it's quite understandable that when you are having so many privileges and you don't need to struggle to get any of those things, you end up naturally developing a sense of entitlement. And you should be conscious of that, wary of developing the sense of entitlement. And so don't accept failure and work towards making those failures as success. And the last thing I would say is that, don't hesitate to be inspired by other experiences. I think there's one thing that all of us have to constantly remind ourselves is that every other person's life experience can be an inspiration. So share your own experiences, but also draw upon others' experiences. Because after all, you are in a community where there is so many people's experiences that can be worthy of imbibing and learning from.
No, thank you. I think these are tremendously critical pieces of advice for many young people who are watching this episode to dream big, to not be deterred by a sense of or a fear of failure, and to look at failures as a step towards moving ahead with life, moving towards whatever it is that they have dreamt of becoming. So thank you very much, Raj, again for your time, for sharing your inspiring journey with us. And as you said, we should look for inspiration in every aspect of our lives and be inspired by stories of others. And I'm positive that the story that we are sharing with the world would truly inspire many. Thank you very much, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you very much, Vasna. Such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.